greedy fucks. All of you. Could have
had a fun game of DnD.
if everybody just did what they were told. Instead, you turned into animals. Trying to squeeze a little bit more out for yourselves.
I know that Black Summer didn't quite hit for everybody, but for those it landed with, including myself, it felt like the show smacked us over the head with a brain-drenched crowbar and dragged us kicking and screaming in a state of shock all the way to the end of Season 1. For about 2 weeks after Season 1 ended, I was obsessed. I could think of absolutely nothing else. And Season 2 was even better. It doubled down on all the strengths and tried to eliminate as many of the weaknesses as possible. We are going to learn how to rip off this weird cinema geek zombie show in D&D. Why? Because it's my channel, and I like this weird cinema geek zombie show. Make your own channel. If you're new here, I'll give you the rundown on how we do rip-off videos. This is not a video where I teach you how to make a Black Summer adventure module for your players. Nor is this guide attached to any one system. I'm a Pathfinder player, but everything in this guide will be just as applicable for D&D. Really, what we're doing is we're poking around in the rotten black guts of Black Summer and taking out all the tropes and story ideas and narrative elements that can benefit our own D&D games, whether or not they are related to Black Summer. And we're stealing them, baby. So to make it absolutely crystal clear, you will find things in this video that you can rip off for your own games, whether or not you are playing anything to do with horror or zombies. And if it's not immediately obvious from all of this, spoilers ahead, guy.
I don't think you can stay.
Why not? Please?
I don't know if you're useful.
I can't go back out there. I poke my eye out with a stick. I can be useful, I can. I make D&D videos on the internet. I have subscribers.
They're all dead.
All three?
I think you should go.
I can't do that. I wrote a big script for this video, and I won't have enough content if I drop the whole Black Summer thing.
Then I'm gonna have to shoot you.
Please don't. Whatever happened, it's done. I can help. I can teach people about non-linear storytelling in Dungeons and Dragons.
I need help dumping the bodies. Can you do that?
I didn't really session prep for that, but yeah, I can do that.
I'm gonna get inside and make a fire. It's cold.
Alright, now, it's not a secret that characterization is not so much a weakness of the show, so much as it is an element that the production team has decided is a relative non-factor in the story they want to tell. That's fine as a decision, but it does leave us with a little bit of difficulty as players to find out what we can learn from the cast of Black Summer. Instead, we'll go in extra deep on the main character so that we don't spread ourselves too thin. Without further ado, let's talk about Rose. Rose, no, stop, no, Rose! The survivor known as Rose goes through a tough character arc, always taking the compassionate option in Season 1, and always having it explode in her face. By the end of the first season, Rose has had the kindness beaten out of her by life, and comes to be the kind of person who can make the hard decisions that need to be made. No, not that one, Rose, stop! Season 2 Rose is controversial, but I love her to death, and I want to see more of her story. In Season 2, Rose is no longer a survivor. Rose becomes yet one more force of nature that everyone else just needs to survive.
I love it. And Rose isn't just pure unlovable malice. We have a few moments where we see her compassionate side coming out. She's just killed this dude's violent family, but he didn't do anything to her. So she struggles with the decision of whether or not to let him live.
There's no time.
Until she doesn't.
Jesus Christ, Rose! Stop!
We also see that there's a curious hypocrisy in her that I feel will be a wonderful thing for her to deal with in Season 3. Rose will be an absolute psycho to protect her daughter, but is rightfully horrified when she sees her daughter following her lead.
What the fuck did you do?
We're leaving.
Now, how do you translate this into D&D without coming off as a chaotic, stupid edgelord? Let's start with when it's appropriate to play a Rose-inspired character. Generally, it's not going to work in a typical campaign. The themes are typically more heroic than tragic, and you'll sort of lack the justification for your character arc. So the other players will likely see your transformation as just a bit forced and more than a little bit unwelcome. If you're playing an evil campaign, playing as a Rose who starts good and transitions to evil is a pretty good story. Likewise, a horror-themed campaign where the dark parts of the world start to overcome your compassion is a great opportunity to do a Rose arc. Ask your DM before the game as to what mood they are aiming for. And if it leans on the darker and grittier side, then you can take it as an opportunity to be the murder mom you want to see in the world. Next, let's talk about that character arc. You only have so much control over what the DM actually throws at you to create your arc. But for a Rose-inspired character, I'd keep a little sliding scale in your notebook from compassionate to ruthless. Start out almost entirely at the compassionate end of the spectrum, and refer back to your chart often. If you're faced with a situation where you need to choose between compassion or ruthlessness, make a judgment based off of where you sit on the scale. Your early naivete should end badly to kickstart your journey. Whenever compassion blows up in your face, move yourself one more step towards ruthlessness. You can do the same the other way around, but be stingy about it. It's hard to become unjaded. To justify it, you need to have an ironclad motivation pushing your Rose forward. Something that you come to understand is more important than the lives you're leaving shattered behind you. With luck and good role-playing, the other players will be able to notice the changes in your character, and thus, they won't be too annoyed by it. The last thing you need to remember is that there are always three perspectives that Rose is being viewed through. Rose's POV, her allies' POV, and the victim's POV. I won't waste time talking about your own POV. I assume you already like your character. Now, TV Rose runs into some problems with the other POV. We're led in the show to sympathize with some of Rose's victims, and we like them a lot. It leads to members of the audience not liking Rose all that much.
Those people are wrong and they don't know what it means to be a girl boss.
Carry my shit.
But regardless, there won't be that ingrained sympathy towards the villainous NPCs in a D&D game, so you can go ahead and be scary and ruthless. It's no problem. But the big risk is your allies. If you want to keep the table fun for everyone, you can't be as ruthless to the other players. Rose totally kills her allies sometimes, and it's semi-justifiable in the show, but it will just end in no one having fun if you do it in a D&D game. The only person Rose considers to be an absolute priority to keep safe is her daughter. Her friends are all expendable. If you want to keep things fun for the table, your version of Rose needs to extend that circle of protection to her entire adventuring party. You'll even get some fun and interesting role-playing opportunities there if other characters start to chafe under the horrid stuff you do in the name of keeping them safe.
let's talk about non-linear storytelling. I hear you DMs already ripping out your hair at the mind-boggling amount of difficulty that it will be to run a game of DnD in a non-linear way. Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, doesn't it? God, I was that young once. Well, there are two major ways to be non-linear, and Season 1 and Season 2 approach it differently. The first approach, which is the Season 1 approach, doesn't necessarily center the point of view in a scrambled order. They show the events happening mostly in parallel. We get a lot of very distinctive moments like this. There's that suburban area in Episode 1 where we follow two POVs in the same area during the same span of time, and it provides a greater deal of context as to what's going on. We see a dying girl in the first POV, and then our POV character is pulled away elsewhere. In our second POV, we take the girl's perspective, and we see how she died, and we see her zombified rampage after death, connecting small details left unexplained in the first point of view. We also see the same effect in the final episode of Season 1, in which all the characters are split up as they attempt to make it to the stadium alive. The time frame is all tied together by an explosion that they all see separately. The other non-linear approach, which is primarily the Season 2 approach, focuses less on parallels, though those are still present, and it focuses a lot more on jumping through time. Often, such as when they show Freddy entering the house with everyone dead during Episode 1, we see the aftermath first, and then the show will spend several episodes jumping through time to explain how we got here. Now, I love the Season 1 approach, probably more than I like the Season 2 approach, but it does not blend well with Dungeons & Dragons, because it doesn't interact very nicely with player choice. You, as the DM, cannot properly trust yourself to present a scene and then jump back in time, knowing that the scene will come to pass. Player choice can easily mess up your plans. You can show them a scene, the players can choose to do something entirely different, and then you're screwed. If you want to run a game based on parallel storytelling, it's quite likely going to be necessary that you give your players multiple characters that they can play, at least on a temporary basis. Thus, they have something to do every time the POV shifts. Here's an example session you could run in the middle of a larger campaign that I think your players would enjoy. Let's stick with zombies to be simple, but we'll put it in a medieval setting since that's likely what you're all playing with. We start at a temple, with the players all taking control of priests for a short time with low-level civilian classes. They finish up their duties for the day, and hear some rumors of deaths in the area, and the badly mauled bodies that might have been hauled into the crypt. They finish up their duties for the day, and hear some rumors of deaths in the area, and of the badly mauled bodies that have been hauled into the crypt. Eventually, the players will hear screaming from elsewhere in the temple, and will immediately hop POVs. The players will be given control of their regular party, and will assume the reason that they're here is to speak with one of the priests at the temple. The players make their way through town, and find it in a disarray, with confused people watching as the desperate evacuees from the temple run as far away as they can. The players will have the opportunity to investigate, but no one knows much. The temple is under attack, and many people are dead. The party will eventually reach the front of the temple, at which point we'll jump POVs again. Give players the control of the 4 dead bodies that were hauled in from the streets. Describe how they're pulled back mindlessly from oblivion, their only desire to feed. From there, task your players with rampaging through the crypt as their monstrous new characters. And when they've caused suitable havoc, switch POVs to the priests in the first POV, who now have to survive whatever chaos the players caused elsewhere. Finally, when the priests have secured themselves somewhere safe, or perhaps when they've died, switch POVs to the adventuring party, and run the encounter as a dungeon crawl, where all the things that happened in the other segments are currently going on as the players exterminate the undead host. It's a unique little adventure,
and your players will remember it much more than they'll remember an ordinary dungeon crawl. And a quick recommendation, if you really like this gameplay style, maybe check out the board game Fiasco, which is very much about this sort of thing, but it's all narrative and no gameplay. You could very easily merge the story of Fiasco with the mechanics of D&D in order to regularly play non-linear games on the fly without very much in the way of DM planning.
Anna, it's time.
Oh my god. While I was gathering clips, I found this. Look, Rose is a D&D player. What else would you use D20s for? She's one of us!
Look at me. Such a young man. Nothing bad has happened to me. Nothing bad will happen to me.
We'll keep the setting section short, as there's only a little bit to say. I'm not going to go too far into analyzing zombies, as they're a pretty well-worn trope. But I will go over how you might adapt other fantasy scenarios to get a Black Summer vibe without having to actually do zombies if you don't want to. The name of the game to replicate a zombie apocalypse without zombies is to make it so that the characters feel less like adventurers and more like desperate refugees, whose biggest problem is other refugees. Rather than give you a hypothetical rip-off of the trope, let me point to a different piece of media that adopts a zombie plot structure without zombies. Let's talk about the Banner Saga. The Banner Saga, for those who are not familiar with it, is the story of Rook and Alette, a humble northern hunter and his young daughter as they attempt to navigate the horrors of the end of the world at the hands of the Dredges, great, swarming stone creatures that kill and maim without mercy. They sweep down from the north in a chaotic and endless horde, wiping out civilization as they march and burying entire nations beneath their stony boots. Narratively speaking, the Dredges do what zombies do, and the survivors have to band together in great refugee caravans to survive, often battling with other desperate survivors if they want to live. Your zombie apocalypse creatures can be whatever you want them to be. Banner Saga used stone golems, which maybe seems strange, but it just highlights my point. You could have a goblin apocalypse, a vampire apocalypse, dragons, kobolds, whatever. Just make sure that your players start out as close to civilians as possible. Some systems might even let you play civilian classes at first, and then swap to adventuring classes after a few sessions. Have fun with it, and build whatever flavor of zombie apocalypse you like. I'll also note, if you would actually like to run a short game playing as yourselves in a zombie apocalypse, there is always End of the World RPG, which is probably not suitable for long campaigns, but it is a very fun little system for a short 2 or 3 adventure game.
So next is... Holy, okay. Yeah, I gotta be back in a second. I gotta go get the firewood. I'll be honest, this chapter is heavily interlinked with Chapter 3, and that's because Black Summer's use of space and their use of nonlinear storytelling blend together quite seamlessly. However, there was simply no possibility of not getting into Black Summer's use of space, because not only is it extremely iconic, but there's also a lot we can learn from it.
The diner from Season 1. The mansion, lodge, and airfield from Season 2. Black Summer loves establishing a space, often through camera work, and then using it as a set piece to tell the story. D&D doesn't have cinematography, but you can take advantage of a space too, in order to get those incredible Black Summer vibes, or just to improve your ability as a DM to make a space feel real and lived in. Start out with a full map of the space you intend on using. Don't make it too large if you don't want to drive yourself insane, but have it comfortably big so that things can spread out and happen in multiple rooms or areas. You should make sure that this is a space that the players have some time to familiarize themselves with prior to any encounters happening here. Maybe this space is the player's home base. Maybe it's the local inn where they're staying, or it's their safe house as part of a heist. Either way, give the players time, maybe over the course of multiple sessions, to feel out the location before you try and use it as a set piece. When the time comes to run your encounter in the location, remember what we learned about parallel storytelling in Chapter 3 and try to apply it here. Have your players spread across the space when this adventure starts, and, if possible, apply whatever threat it is equally across the space. Put everything into the same turn order and run it all at once, all across the location. If things are happening in a location that the players can't see, that's fine. Just run that stuff behind the DM screen and don't ignore it. I'll give an example that I've actually run in the past for the sake of context. I had a session in the aftermath of a heist gone wrong in which the uncontrolled psychic powers of one of the NPCs the players were traveling with tore open a hole in the warp and quite literally cast the player's safe house into hell. Everyone was separated when it happened, doing their own thing in their rooms. And what I ended up doing was scrambling all the doorways. Every door in the house led to some other doorway where it ought not to go. Then I filled the house with various monsters, traps, and psychic phenomenon, and then I just had everyone roll initiative. The session was one of my favorites I ever ran. Everyone had to re-explore the safe house, trying to group up through doorways that no longer made sense, and avoid monsters they couldn't handle alone as they did so. Everyone seemed to really like that session, and I think it delivers on that Black Summer concept of set-piece parallel storytelling. So to recap, establish your space before you do your encounter. Create a threat that exists more or less everywhere in the space, and split your players up, running their actions in parallel. This isn't one-to-one with how Black Summer does this stuff, but it's the best translation of it into Dungeons & Dragons. Give it a try in your campaign if you have the opportunity. I suspect you'll end up with an extremely memorable session.
And that is how you rip off Black Summer in D&D. And because I clearly hate myself, if I reach 100 subscribers, I will be doing How to Rip Off Too Hot to Handle in Dungeons & Dragons. God, I hate that already.